This episode of Nos Arietes is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Arietes since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Hi, I'm Will Bruin, and I was just recognized as a Seattle Sounders legend. Now I get to do voice reads for the Sounder at Heart podcast network.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
A save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rangers through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nicoladero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is campeón!
It's gone! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
We want to win. It's Seattle Sounders, bro.
Porque says cheated.
You know, what was the thought process in terms of who you decided to use and who you didn't?
Ever since Sounder Hart wrote a commentary that we didn't take Open Cup seriously.
Welcome back to another episode of Nos Arietes, sponsored by Full Pull Wines and our subscribers. I am Jeremiah O'Shan. Joining me today is Aaron Campo and our engineer Lickett. This is the Mailbag episode for November, where we're doing it on November 13th, about 10 days before the Sounders playoff game against LAFC. So it's a good time to sort of take stock of everything that's going on here. And just answer some of your questions. Aaron, you excited? You excited to get into these questions?
Let's do it. Yeah, they've been sitting there for a while, so apologies on that. We had some stuff come up in the world, and
it's been a little hectic. It's been a little hectic. Do you want to start? Or do you want me to start, Aaron?
I can start. I think the first one is from David H. And I will throw out the caveat. Some of these questions are from a little bit ago, so if the timing of them seems a little weird, we've kept them in if it's only a little weird. If they are totally have already been answered or anything like that, we've pulled them out. But any weirdness of the timing or the phrasing of the questions is our tardiness and not the asker. So first one is from David H. In your opinion, which player/players on the roster deserved more playing time this season than they got?
It's a good question. I think the player who I would have liked to have seen more of is probably Josh Atencio is at the top of the list. And I think I feel bad for him in part because this seems to be the third year. Is that right? I think it's, maybe it's the second or third year where it felt like he was on the verge of being like a breakout star. Third year. And he just didn't really, he injuries or whatever else conspired to keep him from getting more playing time. I still really like him. I still am very bullish on his potential. I've liked him basically in every game he played. I mean, even when we've seen him for the most part in the last few months, he's looked good. He looks like he can do a job, but he just keeps getting sort of like bumped for one reason or another. The latest being Christian Roldan sort of sliding back into the defensive midfield. I guess Danny Leyva might be another one who I would put on that list. Early on in this season, I was thinking he looks like he could be Albert's backup, and we've seen Brian use him like that a little bit. We saw him probably most effectively do that against Houston, where he came in late and helped generate a goal there. I don't know. Anyone else that you think, Aaron?
Yeah, I have spent some time trying to think. I figured Atencio was your answer, and Leyva is a great shout as well. I think the thing with Leyva is that he offers something that nobody else aside from Albert really does, and so I think that gives him a little bit of an edge getting playing time. Whereas Atencio does a lot of things really well that other guys on the team do well that
Yeah.
are ahead of him in the pecking order, and that works against him. Whether or not those players do those things better, I think, is a fair question. It does seem weird that Atencio is so frequently the odd man out, and that almost all of his appearances seemingly are garbage time appearances. So I think he's the obvious answer. I guess maybe you could make a case for Nathan. I don't know, but I don't know about deserve, right? I would have liked to see a little bit more of Nathan, but I think when you
it's an interesting. Yeah, I think it's, and I also don't know if there's any time where I'm like, oh man, I really wish he would have gotten more minutes. Like it would have been great to see him instead of this other person.
Exactly.
But it's a little bit of a shame that he's probably not coming back, and that's without really, like, he hardly played. Like I mean, he really, like, he barely played. Like
he did. Yeah.
He started the first game of the season. I don't know that he started I don't think he started another MLS game.
Yeah,
I guess
don't
I
think
could look that up.
And he, if I recall correctly, wasn't actually very good in that game, if I remember right.
He was okay. I mean, he was okay. He came out with, I think he may have gotten hurt.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I would say he's maybe the biggest disappointment, but it's not necessarily disappointing because he was bad. It was just he just couldn't get on the field. Yeah, Nathan made one start. He played 90 minutes.
Yeah.
In league play total.
It's crazy. I mean, Yamar and Reagan are very durable. So he's not going to get there's not a need for a lot of rotation there. And I think for whatever reason, he just wasn't favored when the rotation was needed. And I mean, to some extent,
I think one of the things that really hurt him was, he left the team right away to go get his green card, and then he also got hurt. And so when the Sounders really needed him was in that first month or so of the season, and he wasn't really available. And so that really hurt. I think that hurt him a lot, and he never really had a chance to get in. Now that I'm looking at the minutes from everyone, Dylan Tevez is another player who I have a hard time, like, unlike like Atencio and Leyva, I think I could probably go through the season and say, like, oh, I would have liked to have seen him more here, would have liked to have seen him more here, all those things. Tevez is tough because he only played 89 minutes. He did score. He had that great goal against Montreal early in the season, and it looked like he was sort of he was going to get some more minutes, but he did not. He played almost exclusively for Defiance this year, and his last appearance of any sort came in July. He played a few times early in the season. Like, most of his minutes came early in the season, and yeah, I mean, it's a tough one.
It's tough too for him because he's a guy who is kind of getting to the age and stage in his career where, because his deal is up, right? So
I think so. Yeah. I mean, he might have an option, but I think the Sounders would have if I'm the Sounders, it's not, like he played almost 400 minutes for the first team last year, and it's tough to justify bringing him back. Not even for, like, even for him. Like, if I'm him, I don't know that I want to come back. Like, I would probably rather go to another MLS team or even a USL Championship team where I think I'm going to play. Like, if you want to be a professional soccer player, you got to be playing at 20. I mean, he's going to be 25 next year. He can't not be playing.
Yeah, and I think he's still very much young enough where if he goes to a USL Championship team and plays really well, he could easily still have a very solid MLS career. But if he is playing for Defiance again next year, he's probably not, right? Like, the USL Championship is probably his ceiling. So, and I think he's a good enough player to have a good MLS career. So I wouldn't blame him for wanting to leave if they can't guarantee him that he's in their plans.
Yeah, and so, I mean, he did play a fair amount for Defiance. He had, he scored 4 goals. He had 4 goals for the Defiance this year. And I like him. I think he had 637 minutes for the Defiance this year. I think he's a decent player. I don't know that he's not the player I would say, like, oh, I really wish we would have seen him more. But I feel it would have been interesting to see more of him. But I don't know. I guess you could say Masovsky is another one who it would have been good to see more of him, but I think he's back, so I don't know.
Right.
It's less of a
Yeah, there's a ton of guys that I wish we had seen more of, but in terms of guys I think deserve to play more, I think it's really Atencio and Leyva.
yeah. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
All right. So this is from Boomstick 315. I guess I kind of stole his thunder a little bit here. If he continues not to get minutes, do you think we could see other teams in MLS try to trade for Josh Atencio?
Well, I figured Josh Atencio was going to be the answer to that first question, so I thought it was a nice segue.
Oh, okay, good.
So
good segue.
no thunder stealing. It's an interesting question. If I had a guess, and this is a guess just based on my powers of observation more than anything else, I think the plan is probably to move Obed next year, to try to sell him on, and I would imagine that Atencio is the guy that they see slotting in for him.
Yeah.
I think if they are not able to do that, if they're not able to move Obed and he's going to be here for the foreseeable, I think for both parties, it's probably the best thing to try to move him. He's going to have value. He's not going to have as much value as he should because he hasn't been playing, unfortunately. I would hate to lose him, but he has value. And if he's not going to be playing regularly, I don't know. I think you almost have to. And I think it would be in his best interest to advocate for that. And I think it would be a real, I don't want to say disaster of roster management if they have to move him in a situation like that, but it certainly would not be one of their better moments.
It would not be. And I'll still, I say this all the time. I've said this many times, but here's a player who, if you look at his per 90 stats and you said, okay, here's a 20, he's going to turn 23 at the beginning of next year. He'll be 23 next season. And you just look at his per 90 stats, the guy ranks in the 98th percentile for tackles and interceptions. He's in the 99th percentile for blocks. He's in the 86th percentile for progressive passes received, 86th percentile for successful take-ons, 90% for progressive carries, 80th percentile for progressive passes. I mean, this is a guy who on paper you go, man, if the Sounders were looking to acquire, so you'd be like, yeah, go get this guy.
Yeah.
I mean, his per 90 stats are so good. And I really, really hope the Sounders figure out how to use him more next year than they used him this year. I mean, to some degree, I guess it's kind of his fault because he keeps getting hurt at really inopportune times. And I will say that, he broke out in 2021. Yeah, I guess it has been 3 straight years where you thought that next year is the year he really solidifies himself.
Yeah.
So he breaks out in 2021 and he ends up only playing half as many minutes the next year, which is mainly the fault of injuries. And then he has played progressively more minutes each year, but it's just not nearly, he's never taken that leap where he's a 2,500 minute player. And yeah, I mean, I would think, for sure, I guess the short answer is for sure teams are calling about Josh Atencio. There's no question in my mind that teams are calling about him. And at some point, I suppose the Sounders have to ask themselves what it's going to take to let him go. But I still think he's the most value he offers you is on your roster. But if he's not going to be playing, then you need to move him on.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of a similar theme with the next one from Walter. Imagine you're Jordan Morris. If the Sounders get an M-Prime DP9, do you ask for a trade? I know it would be unlikely for off-field reasons, but Jordan is in his prime and wants to be the 9. I think he's a high-end 9 in the league and can land a starting role elsewhere. Now is the time to make a move if he's going to.
It's a good question. I do wonder. It's a fair thing to ask. I don't know if he is so dead set on playing as a 9 that if the Sounders said, look, we think you are best served playing on the wing and we are bringing in this dynamic number 9 and this is best for everyone. I don't know. I don't think he would ask for a trade, but I wouldn't I wouldn't close that door. I think that's possible that he could. And then I think moving him is tough. I don't know what's a reasonable ask for him. I mean, he's going to be 30 next year, right?
Yeah.
He's still, if he, especially if he, one of the things today we asked Brian Schmetzer about the impact of homegrown players on the roster. And I thought it was a very sober answer, which was something along the lines of, if they're delivering championships, then it's great. And if our dependence on homegrown players is sort of lowering our ceiling, then that's a problem. I'm paraphrasing what he said. But sort of one of the things he said is like, we need Jordan Morris to score in big games. We need Jackson Reagan to come through in the biggest matches. And if our homegrown players are putting in those kinds of performance, it's great. If they aren't, then that's a problem. And so I think we're sort of getting to that point where, you and I have both talked about how it's unfair to judge a player purely on their playoff performances or whatever, but at some point you need Jordan Morris to score in the biggest games. And if he's not scoring in the biggest games, that does become a problem. So I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, that is absolutely fair. He is second among active players in playoff goals.
He is, but and that's totally true. I think it's worth pointing out that he hasn't scored after the conference, or he hasn't scored beyond the conference semis since 2016 when he scored in the conference finals. And that's not to say that I'm not trying to diminish his achievements. He's a very good player. I just think that if he's your number 9, I think part of what you're needing to ask from is, and I'm not saying if he doesn't score against LAFC, then you should get another number 9. I'm just saying that it's a reasonable thing to ask for him to do.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, I think that it's the reason whether or not they should replace him at the 9 is even a question, right? Right. And we don't need to retread how I feel about that, but I do think it's a fair criticism that he hasn't been able to score, against Portland, for example, that he hasn't scored later in the playoffs in a while, that he hasn't been able to score against LAFC. I think my position on this stuff has always been, we're talking really small sample sizes.
Yes.
Oba never scored in the playoffs either, right? Like he didn't score in the playoffs at all, right? So
he didn't.
And I think
that's true. And neither did Freddie.
And whenever people talk about the kind of striker they want to see the Sounders go out and get, Oba is always the guy that gets
right. Yeah, no, I agree.
So, but I don't. That's not to say I think any of that is an unfair criticism, because it's not at all. And I think Schmetzer is right. Even if you talking about Jordan, but also if you zoom out to just the 30,000 foot level and think generally, the goal is not to feel the team of homegrowns and to feel all warm and fuzzy about that. The goal is to win championships. And if you think that's
sort of the point he was making.
Yeah, and it's totally true. And I do think that there is a tendency amongst Sounders fans and the team itself to some degree to get overly attached to players, to feel overly nostalgic about players. And I think that that's reasonable. Like, fans don't have to make cold, hard decisions, but I do feel like sometimes that bleeds into the club's decision-making process at times. So I don't know. I would not trade Jordan unless he specifically asked for one under any circumstances.
I totally agree with that. Yes.
Just because I think even if he's playing on the wing, he's still a really good value for his contract.
Yeah.
A guy that's going to contribute at that level on a TAM deal, I think, is a really solid deal. But if he did ask for one, I would understand it. And I think you could probably get a decent-ish return. I think he's probably worth more to the Sounders than he is to other teams, just because of who he is and all that stuff. But yeah, and I hope we don't see it. And if I can segue into the next question, it's from Chico Flores, and it's a follow-up specifically to this question. Is this the right time to sell Jordan, given that he's arguably having his best season as a Sounder, playing mostly in the 9, and the tendency that the club has maybe to retain players beyond their prime? Should the front office be looking to make that move and maximize his value and allocate the funds towards acquiring a more dynamic player?
That's a more interesting idea. Like if you feel like you can go into the international market, because I suspect that Jordan still would welcome the possibility of playing in Europe. I don't think he has closed that. I don't think he's waking up every morning and saying, how do I get back to Swansea? But I do think that if a championship team or a even higher team comes to the Sounders with a real offer, and maybe it's a loan with a purchase option or something like that, but a real offer, I think the Sounders absolutely should explore that possibility. I think it would be a lot more enticing than trading him within MLS.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the market for Jordan is. When he went to Swansea in 2021, in 2021, that was probably his peak value. And my understanding was that the purchase option was something like $7 to $10 million if he had forced them to exercise it.
Yeah.
I don't think they could get that now.
No. The transfer market for players of Jordan's caliber and career stage is pretty depressed these days, I would say. 3 to 5 seems more likely.
But I would imagine if that's a thing that I would imagine that he would be open to the move, and it would, I would think the Sounders would be, let's put it this way. I don't think the Sounders would turn it down out of hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like they would present it to him and say like, hey, if this is a move you want to do, we want to do right by you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that honestly, I think that if you aren't going to really get anything for him, considering his contract status and everything like that, it's probably worth considering if it's, I don't know, like 1.5, 2 million. I think he's worth more than that. I think you can get more than that. But if he really wants it and that's what a club is paying, I think that that's like the line at which you could reasonably say that's not a reasonable offer. So anything above like 2 million-ish, I think would be fair. And I think there are teams out there that would pay that for him. And I think that there are teams where he could be a really effective player in their systems. I think especially in the championship, I think he'd really excel in the championship, especially if he got to play up top.
Right. All right. This is from the list. He says, which current players would you trade or sell within MLS? And would you trade some defense to get better offense?
I think that this team is set up where they don't have to do that. That's not to say that I wouldn't trade defensive players. I would like to see one of the starting fullbacks moved on, and I'd like to see meaningful competition brought in for the other one. So I would be willing to move defensive players, but I think the idea of, okay, we have trouble scoring, so we need to trade some of what we're better at to get better in that department, I don't really think holds true, because of if the Sounders were totally maxed out in terms of the resources that they had available in terms of cap space, DP spots, all that, the money they can spend in the transfer market, then I think you have to consider, okay, we need to have a slightly more well-balanced team so that we're not as easy to beat by the elite teams, right? But they're not in that situation. I think they can continue to be an elite defensive team while improving significantly in the attack. Obviously, if they move Nuhu, it's going to be tough to be quite as good defensively, but I think they can still be a very, very good defensive team. So I think both fullbacks there are players they should be open to listening to offers for. I think pretty much anyone that's not I would even say like Yamar is somebody they could potentially listen to offers for. He's a great player, but he's not getting any younger. He probably still has quite a bit of value within MLS. So for the right offer, sure. I would, I mean, there are very few guys on this team I wouldn't listen to the right offer for, frankly. I think that, they've got to be willing to be more adventurous. I think with some of their intra-league moves.
I would hope that if anything, like this season right now is it can go anywhere. I don't like given the state of the bracket, it's not outside the realm of possibility that the Sounders could win MLS Cup. It's also not outside of the realm of it's very much within the realm of possibility that they will lose their next game. It's like anything could really happen, and I think that what it tells us is that the Sounders need to be open to doing anything at this point.
Yeah.
Like they can't dismiss moves out of hand. They can't they can't get married to any they can't fall in love with their roster as it is. They have to change this up. And I think that's one thing we learned this year is that as much as the stability I think has helped them get to where they are, I think it's also hard to deny that they had a lower their ceiling is lowered a little bit.
Yeah. I think the only player on the roster that I would consider truly untradeable is Obed. And that's just because I think it'd be crazy to trade a guy who you're probably going to get a record transfer fee for, club record transfer fee.
Right.
So we got 4 questions that were not necessarily identical, but covered a lot of the same ground and are pretty related. So we're just going to kind of talk about these topics generally. And that's about, they were about the roster, how we'd prioritize things, how the playoffs might impact roster decisions, stuff like that. Those were from Andrew, the Joshua, Spaceman Spliff, and Ken W. So thank you to y'all. So hopefully we'll cover some or most of the same ground that was in your question. But yeah, just general thoughts, Jeremiah, on how the playoffs playing out might impact things, whether or not you decide where you're going to spend a DP spot based on how things shake out, the positions you'd prioritize improving, all that kind of good stuff.
I would hope that the playoffs don't impact their thinking, frankly. Like they if they win MLS Cup, great. But that doesn't really change how I would think the Sounders have an opinion of this roster. And I'm sure on some level it will make some decisions a little easier, some other decisions a little harder. But I think ultimately the Sounders have made their assessments of the players on I don't think anyone's going to come out there and just totally change their perception on, I suppose there's a world where let's just say Jordan scores 3 goals down the stretch here and they win MLS Cup. I think that makes it probably a little easier to say maybe we don't need to go out and get a number 9.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network, which now includes No Sarietes, Lobbing Scorchers, and the Cooler Guild. We've been independent since August of 2023, but need your support to make sure it continues. Although this podcast is free, it's only made possible by your continued support. Memberships start as low as $25 a year, which not only helps make podcasts like this one happen, but also gets you access to everything we produce. If you're able to support us at higher levels, starting at $75 a year, you gain access to a host of other perks, most notably entry into our members-only Discord, where the smartest, funniest, and most engaged commenters share their thoughts and ideas. To find out more, just visit sounderatheart.com and click the subscribe button in the top right corner. Thanks for listening.
But that might be the only thing that could really I don't think anyone else is capable of seriously changing the trajectory of, or maybe Pedro de la Vega goes off and they go, okay, maybe we don't need to rush into another DP signing or something. I don't know. I suppose that these are all possibilities, right? But
yeah,
everything I've heard from inside the team is that there are strong opinions about needing to shake things up. And I suppose it's possible that if they win MLS Cup, that the purse strings get a little tighter because it's we don't need this, but I don't think that's gonna happen.
I feel like that's an easier sell if Raul's under contract for another year or whatever, right? Or they had been planning to move on from Rusnak and make 2 big signings, but I don't think that's the case, right? I think they're probably not going to pay 2 big transfer fees. How about where you would prioritize improving the roster next year?
I think still the attack is where I want to see the most. Like I know there's been some talk about like, oh, they should go out and get a real 6. I want to see, honestly, I want to see Christian. I'm comfortable with Christian being the starting 6. Maybe you bring in a veteran to add a little bit there, but I don't think there's a lot of upside in that way. If you're looking for bang for buck, if you can bring in a young attacking player, that's the answer. It seems like always, but it is sort of how I really like on some level. Georgie, Paul, and Pedro are relatively young attacking pieces with upside, and if any one of them can be a 10 goal, 10 assist kind of player next year, you maybe don't you talk yourself into not needing one. But I think it would be a lot easier to have another player out there who's competing for minutes as a, like, you can't have enough attacking talent. This team still is like, this team definitely lacks high level attacking depth.
Yep.
And
Agree.
it's I suppose bring in another fullback would be nice, but I don't want to spend a whole bunch of money on another fullback.
Yeah, I think I'm mostly in agreement. I really do think they need to move on from one of the two fullbacks, just if for no other reason than to have some turnover. And I think I was very firmly on we should prioritize a 6 train until we saw what Christian could do at that spot.
Right.
Still.
That's sort of how I felt too.
And he's been, I think, fantastic, or at least good enough that it's not a concern for me anymore. I mean, obviously, if the guy that you feel like can be your cornerstone at that position is out there and available, and you want to make the move now, that's fine. But it's not something I would prioritize.
It also changes if Obed gets sold in the off season as opposed to in the summer. That also changes things a lot, because right now my assumption is you have, at the very least, you have Obed, Christian, and Atencio competing for 2 spots. And I don't feel like you need a 4th player to throw in that mix.
No, because I think like you have guys that can do a job in those spots
deeper down. Yeah,
down
exactly.
if you have to. I think for me, they need to sign a guy you expect to start in one of the attacking positions, whether he's a forward or a winger. And that needs to be probably your keystone, for lack of a better term, signing of the off season. And I think if that guy is a striker, you need to find a winger that can play striker, or a striker that can play winger that's also like a TAM type player that can be depth. Right. And if they're a winger, you need somebody who can play striker ahead of Masovsky, and somebody that can play both on the wing and as a striker. I think this is really what they need to do. Basically, if they could just clone Jordan Morris and then sign an elite winger, that would be perfect.
Right. Yeah. All right. This is from Green Pipes. This is, was it more impressive for Schmetzer to bench Dempsey in 2018 or to bench Rui Diaz in 2024? Both were club legends. Both had big egos. Yet the act of removing them from the starting 11 led to huge turnarounds for their respective seasons.
I think benching Raul and Nico last year, and more so Nico, I guess. Raul wasn't as benched. He started last game of the season, if I recall correctly, but I think that was the ballsiest one. But I think he's willing to do it, maybe not as quick as people would like, but I think, especially with the benefit of being removed from the frustration of seeing Raul on the team sheet, I think he does it a lot more quickly than a lot of coaches would. And I think a lot of coaches would have trouble keeping the locker room if they had moved on from all these guys. I think he's clearly pretty good about knowing when the time is right and being willing to do it. Dempsey, I think, had a little, I don't want to say self-awareness, because that's probably not fair to Raul, but I think Dempsey it seemed to me from the outside looking in that Dempsey handled it a little better. I think especially because he had such a major health scare. but I don't know. Maybe that's just the benefit of
I mean, I think in a
removed.
way he wasn't as overtly disruptive, but I think he was also a little bit more like, I don't need this. I don't need this shit.
Yeah.
Whereas like he retired effectively mid-season. Like if you remember, like basically he got benched and then he was like he pieced out. Not that long after.
Right.
So I think in that way it was easier, and I think that it didn't have the potential to be so disruptive to the locker room, because I don't think Dempsey was the kind of locker room presence that Rui Diaz or Ladero were, who were real leaders in the locker room, and and players really, like I think I always got the sense that Dempsey sort of existed, in sort of like a world outside of the team almost. Like he was friendly with guys, and like him and Oba had a good connection, but I don't know how much he was spending time with players outside of the training facility. Whereas Rui Diaz and Ladero are like have buddies very much, or like leaders on the team. And so I think it was potentially much, much more disruptive in both those cases. And frankly, Schmetzer handled it well. Like I stand by Nico's reporting earlier this year, where he was basically saying that or he reported that the locker room didn't feel as cohesive as it had in the past. And I know Rui Diaz was clearly really upset with the situation, and that he's still here, like he didn't play great against Houston, but that he's still, out there contributing. Like the Sounders don't advance. I don't think the Sounders advance without his contributions from that round.
Yeah.
And, that's saying something, that he's still still putting in the effort and doing all the right stuff, and seems to be a good presence at training these days. So I'm much more impressed, I think, by the way that it's not so much the decision to bench either of those players. It's sort of the way that he's handled the whole situation around them that I find more impressive.
Yeah, I think, we talked about this earlier in the year when we were talking about why Raul is having such a hard time with a reduced role. And, I think it's just because it's very hard, I think, to realize that and to come to terms with.
He's an alpha.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, I'm not a professional athlete, and getting older and the realization that you're getting older completely destroyed my life too. So it's got to be much tougher when your entire identity is tied to your abilities that just aren't going to be there forever. So it's a tough thing to manage. And I think Schmetzer clearly has a talent for it. So this next question, I'm going to read the question first and then read the name of the asker, because I think it's very funny. Is Christian the Sounders GOAT yet? If not, where does he rank, and how long until he surpasses Nico? And that is from Christian Rolldown Enthusiast 7.
Yeah. Good name. Good name. I don't think Christian is the GOAT yet. I think that's still firmly Ladero. And I don't know that there's really anything. I mean, I suppose there is a path toward Christian becoming the GOAT. Like if the Sounders win, I don't know, 2 more championships with Christian as a centerpiece of the team, I think you might have to have that conversation, but there might be other players that you need to have that conversation with as well. Christian, I think he is. I think he sort of occupies a different place in Sounders lore than Nico. Like Christian has never been the best player on the team, so it's hard to say that he was their greatest ever player. He's never been this. I don't think he's ever been the second or third best player on the team, but he's been a really influential player he's going to end up, he will likely end up playing here something like 15 years. That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that there's the GOAT is ostensibly the best player to ever play for the team.
Right.
And I think that there's also the second category of like club legend. And I can see Christian getting to a point where he's like the legend of legends for the Sounders.
Right. Yes.
And I think that's an altogether different thing from being the GOAT. I tried to think of an example of that distinction. And I guess like King Griffey Jr. is the GOAT the Mariners GOAT, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Edgar Martinez is the guy.
Yeah,
he was here his whole career.
That's a good analogy.
I think it's a similar sort of situation there.
Yeah, I like that. All right. This is from Ty. It says, should Brian consider playing with 5 in the back against LAFC similar to 2021? Obviously, it's pretty late in the year to do something like that, but are we really going to just run it back against LAFC? Also, are we getting a third kit next year?
My understanding is that we are getting a third kit next year.
That's my understanding too.
There was a quote leak unquote on what is that? The footy kit leaks or whatever.
Footy headlines.
Footy headlines, yeah. Which is a website that exists entirely of screenshots of color palettes of football kits.
Fascinating.
So yeah, there will be, but I do not think that the 3 weeks before a 1-game playoff is the time to make a bunch of significant tactical changes, unless you are a team that just has that approach of doing that frequently, which those teams do exist, right? They're very much like, we change who we are fundamentally depending on the opponent.
Right.
The Sounders are not that team. And I don't think that they need to make drastic tactical changes to compete against LAFC. They need to not give up a stupid goal early.
Mm-hmm.
It's that simple. Just don't let them score in the 5th minute and you're going to be in the game, I think, right? If you fall behind early and you're having to play from behind, you're screwed against LAFC, I think, mentally and just from a game state perspective.
Yeah, I agree with you. I would be... I realize it's just not very satisfying to say, yeah, you kind of just got to run it back.
Yeah.
But
I mean, yeah.
Like, you kind of, like, you don't have a lot of great, like, so, okay, let's say you do go 5 in the back. So what are you going to do? You're going to run. I mean, I guess you could go with Nuhu on and Reed Baker Whiting on the left. But like, what complicates that also is, Reed is with the U20s right now. And so he's not going to really get back training with the Sounders until next week. Are you really going to just spend like 2 or 3 days implementing a new system
with a guy that has struggled defensively at times? I think it's fair to say.
Yeah.
Against a team that loves to attack down the wings.
Right. Yeah. I kind of think you go with the team that you think is your best squad, and and if you go out like that, you go out like that.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean you can't try to tweak the tactics and approach the game differently than you have in the past. It doesn't have to be the same as the 2-3-0s just because the formation is the same. But I think just changing the system is rough.
Yeah. Yep. All right. This one is, or am I?
Oh yeah, it's your turn. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's from Nate B. How much do you agree with the sentiment that the Sounders are missing a locker room leader since Nico left? Someone to get players back engaged with the game when they start slipping into passive defensive play or let in a silly goal.
I honestly hadn't really considered this as a problem. So I don't agree. I guess I don't agree with that sentiment. I think they have, and this is a team, they have given up some silly goals. But I think every team does. And I think we're hyper aware of it because we follow this team every week, but they've given up, they're averaging, let's see, they've given up 36 goals now in 36 games. If you include the playoffs, they've been really good defensively. And so I don't know. I don't think I don't think what they're lacking is any sort of mental fortitude.
Yeah, I agree. I think that when you follow a team as closely as we all do, the stuff that is frustrating gets blown up in its importance. And that's not to say that the Sounders haven't, like, there are some trends that are real trends, right? Like, they've definitely given up goals late in games where they shouldn't have and things like that. But if anything, I would say the Sounders give away fewer Philly goals silly goals,
Yeah.
than the average team. And I don't really think of them as being a team that is prone to playing defense passively.
I think what gives that perception is that they have given up a lot of late goals or a lot of late equalizers. And I don't I do understand that you can chalk those up to defensive lapses, but I also think that it's fair to say every team is going to have defensive lapses. That the fact that the Sounders have come late in games where it cost them points is really, really annoying, but harder to diagnose as a, like, how do you fix this type of problem?
Right. It really is one of those things of like, is this just a fluke that they happen disproportionately late, or is it something they can fix and something they can address? And I think I tend towards it just being kind of a fluke.
Yeah. All right. This is from Blutarski 1138. Not directly sports related, but with massive flood of users to Blue Sky, how long are we going to have to wait to see the Sounders Reign embrace the new platform as a place for engagement?
Well, I will. Two things. I'll say anecdotally, I've seen a lot of wrestling wrestlers show up in the last week, which could be, I don't know. It's a sign that like notable people have taken notice, I guess. AEW started using their Blue Sky account for the first time in like 2 years. So it seems like people have started migrating, but I think that the thing that works against Blue Sky is also the thing that makes it good, is that there's no algorithmic goosing that gives brands the kind of engagements that something like Threads or previously Twitter would. It is just like you see the posts that you want to see, more or less, and so that's it. It makes it harder for brands, which, frankly, at this phase of my life, is something that I love. I don't, I've got plenty of places that are advertising to me already. I don't need another place for it. So it is a situation of like, if you are the social media department of the Sounders, it's a question of whether or not the juice is worth a squeeze, I guess. And at a certain point, it does become that, but I don't think Blue Sky is ever going to be like a cornerstone of their social media strategy. I think if they do end up migrating off of Twitter, which frankly, I think they should, Threads, Instagram, those are going to be the places where they're, I think, more likely to see the benefit. But I do think it would be nice for them to have some kind of presence over there, even if it's not, super engaging.
I don't think we're too far away from the Sounders moving some of their official account, like having an official presence there. I will say anecdotally, I have been much more active on Blue Sky over the last couple weeks, and I have seen my, as a content producer, I am subject to the sort of the same decision-making process as the Sounders, in the sense that, like, I have a pretty sizable audience on Twitter, and it's hard to just walk away from that. And there's a practical element to that too, as someone who does a lot of work on Twitter, where I get a lot of my news, and I like that. It's hard, like, you cannot just, like, I can't afford to just stop paying attention to Twitter. I could probably afford to stop posting on Twitter, and I think I'm getting closer and closer to doing that. And big brands are in a different, they have different KPIs, and they have different, they have to decide where their effort goes. And I will say that I found an app recently that lets you post to both at the same time, or lets you post to multiple social media platforms at the same time. And I'll just share it. It's called Buffer. I'm not plugging this, but it's free. Like, there's a free tier that lets you do simple stuff like post stuff to multiple sites at once. And so I've been using that, and it seems like it's been good. So I'm going to keep doing that for now. I think we are getting close to maybe taking Sounder at Heart off of Twitter, because Sounder at Heart doesn't really use Twitter for much at this point, other than promoting our work, and we don't get a whole lot of direct traffic from Twitter. So that might be an interesting experiment for Sounder at Heart. I would urge anyone who is listening to this to follow the Sounder at Heart Blue Sky account and And hell, follow me on Blue Sky as well. The more people who follow me on Blue Sky, the easier it is to get off Twitter. If you want to see us getting off of Twitter, let us know. Let us know.
Yeah. Blue Sky's nice. I like it. It's social media for people that are as old as me, I think.
Yeah.
Our last one is from Ken W. How much should I look to the Sounders for healthy distraction in these times?
Hey, if you can keep yourself sane and you find it to be healthy, I think sports are a great way to sort of distract us from the real world. I think you have to be careful to not completely disengage from the real world. I think you have to be careful about not just transferring your anxieties and frustrations from the real world onto your sports fandom, because it makes sports fandom less fun. But sure, I think it can be a healthy distraction.
Yeah, I think that any person that bloviates about bread and circuses when there's more important stuff going on has something equally as tedious and unimportant as sports. They just, for whatever reason,
well, they
don't
might treat politics.
Sports.
I mean, I would imagine a lot of those folks treat politics the way that we treat sports, and they don't.
They do.
And it's like they're not necessarily looking at it in the real world ramifications, because it's impossible to be sitting in here and do that. I think
a political horse race roundtable show in terms of content and tone is almost indistinguishable from anything you're going to see on ESPN. It's covered. Politics are covered the same way. So you're totally right. That's a totally salient point. Yeah. If I didn't have distractions from the real world, and not just now, but just always, right? Like I try to be pretty plugged in, to what's going on in the world. I've had traumatic things happen in my own life that I needed to focus a lot of attention on that were difficult to get through. And I would have lost my mind if I didn't have sports and music and, and wrestling and just like all the stuff that I can disappear in. And so, yeah, I think you should look to them as much as is healthy. And there's nothing wrong with that. You're not letting anybody down with doing that. You're going to go crazy if you are focusing on all the things you're anxious about, because there are a lot of things in the world to be anxious about, and there always have been and always will be. And I think whatever you got to do, like you said, to stay sane is what you should do.
Yeah. Well, that's a good place to sort of call this, I think. Once again, I wanted to thank everyone for submitting questions. As a reminder, all these questions came from our Discord. And if you are someone who wants to get involved in that, I would urge you to first become a member at the supporter level or above. That's $75 a year. And then make sure you email us and ask for an invite to Discord. I get a lot of people. It's funny. A lot of people will contact me and say, I've been trying to figure out how to get onto Discord. Can you help me? And the way to do it is to email me. The email support@sounderatheart.com, and we will send you an invite and get you invited. That's the only way to get on, actually, is you gotta ask for an invitation, because that's the way it's set up. I realize that's not the most efficient way of doing things, but if you're wondering, how do I get onto Discord? That's the way to do it, is to email support@sounderatheart.com, and we will get you all hooked up there. So thanks again to our listeners, our subscribers, for making this work. With that said, and thank you to Full Pull Wines for continuing their sponsorship. Great service that they provide. And I'm sure I would imagine they sold a lot of wine in the last week.
Yeah. I bought a couple bottles, I would say.
Yeah, I bet. All right. Well, all that said, I'm going to sign off. I'm Jeremiah Oshan, signing off for Aaron Campo and Lickett. This is Nos Adiatis. Nos Adiatis. And remember, you'll never get alone.
We love you. Let's win another one!